Morning, everyone. Sorry I'm a little late joining. My computer had a bit of technical problems. And also, you might see that is Etna's tail that is just coming across my camera. She's decided to be my little co-assistant today and is just going to be walking up and down. Pause the recording, and then once we've had a few more people join, I'll start it back up again. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fifth part of our NVivo course, the final part. It's the last time together, unless you attend any of the advanced sessions or send me an email or attend any other thing. But this may be the last time that we get to hang out, depending on how your projects are all going. And today we're going to be looking at the visualizations functions in NVivo. We're going to be looking at a range of different options. Like I said yesterday, so I think that queries are the most wonderful and fantastic thing about NVivo. I think that some of NVivo's visualization options leave a little bit to be desired. And as a result, there are going to be a few times today where I want to talk about how you get your data out of these visualizations and potentially look at using something that is a little bit more flexible. And we'll see why that's the case. And I'll talk about that later on as well. So I want to look at 4 different visualizations today over the course of the next hour. The main one we're going to be focusing on is bar charts. The reason we're going to be focusing on bar charts is that it is going to give us a pretty comprehensive overview of what visualizations do and how they work. Like, it's very similar to the word frequency one that we looked at yesterday, where we are going to be kind of using the bar chart as an example, a worked example of how you negotiate all of the different steps of creating a visualization in NVivo. And then we'll, from that point, move on to look at the hierarchy chart, cluster diagrams, and comparison diagrams. Similar to yesterday, exactly like yesterday, we're going to be working with the sample project in NVivo. And when we think about visualizations, they don't need to happen at the end of a project. You can use them throughout your writing as well. So they can aid you in a few areas there. This is something I wanted to sort of clarify. So let's have a little look at some bar charts, because bar charts are fun. So if I go into my copy of NVivo and I've got the sample project open, we've got a few possibilities when it comes to creating a bar chart. And I want to talk about a few of them. So if we go to the Explore area, if we go to Explore, there is actually a chart drop-down menu. And you can see that there's a few grayed out options. But one of the ones that isn't grayed out on the Windows version is the charts ... And what that is it will open up a chart wizard that will then ask you a few questions about what you actually want to create a bar chart for. And that's great. It works quite well. However, on the Mac version, they don't have access to the wizard, so I'm not going to show it off today. And the wizard will run into the same problems that I'm about to identify with the Mac version as well. And what that problem is it's that when you create a visualization in NVivo, it'll often give you like a blank canvas with a bit of data in that's usually not exactly what you want visualized, and you then need to go and make adjustments to the data that you have selected and make adjustments to the appearance and see if it's manageable and if it's workable. And so what we're going to be looking at is how you kind of create that space, and then why you don't need to panic when it doesn't look exactly how you were expecting it to. So one of the things that you might be interested in coding and visualizing is the coding that has been done on an individual file in your project. So whether that is, across a survey, whether that is a policy document, or anything like that, we can visualize the amount of coding that has been done in a file. Now, again, it's really, really crucial for me to sort of reiterate at this point, NVivo is not quantitative software. All of the visualizations that we're going to be looking at today are driven fundamentally by all of the interpretative work that you've already done. And so it's important to think critically about how all of this is getting visualized. And then when I show you this Barbara example, there'll be a few things to keep in mind when it comes to whether or not you actually include this in writing, because there's a few interesting things that happen when we visualize this interview file. So what we're going to do is we're going to rely on our best friend in NVivo, which is the right click, and we're going to right click on Barbara's interview file. and we are going to select visualize. And it actually gives us a few options. Like this is another way that you can visualize a word cloud. And what we want to do is we want to select chart document coding. And we are going to left click on that. And NVivo is going to generate a bar chart for us. Now, yours might look a little bit different depending on how your version is set up. The reason why mine looks different is as soon as we create this visualization, if you go into the top left here, where it says color scheme, by default, I believe yours will look like this, where it's all blue. I have now turned on item colors, and item colors are colors that you can assign to specific items in your project, like your codes and things like that, so that when you visualize them, they show up a little bit more consistently. You can take it or leave it, because often in, when you're publishing research, you're going to tend to use a monochromatic color scheme anyway. But I kind of find it a little bit more fun and playful to have that selected. And if you want to learn about how to select item colors, I can do that in a little demonstration later on as well. It's very straightforward. And so this is the visualization. And immediately there's probably a few little things that we're not keen to have here if this is going to be a representation of our thematic coding, right? So the first thing is Barbara is the most common code, because NVivo looks at your codes, but it also looks at your cases, and Barbara's case constitutes just under 81% of all text in this interview. Similarly, we've got question 4 down here, question 3, question 1, question 5, and we've got our sentiment as well. We've got sentiment coded. We might not want any of that to show up in our visualization. And this is going to be the case for a lot of the visualizations that we create. And so what we need to do is we need to right click anywhere, and we have in our drop down menu, a select data option. And this select data option is going to allow us to be much more circumspect with the data that we choose to use in this file and in this visualization that we're creating. So by default, our x-axis down here is our most coded items, which isn't going to do it for us because we know that the number one most coded is Barbara's case, so we don't really want that there. So what we're instead going to do is we're going to click selected codes and cases, and then we are going to select whatever we are interested in. And so for me, what I'm going to do is I am just going to take all of these top level codes here with the exclusions of memorable quotes and attitude, because they're not particularly meaningful for this example that I'm giving. So I'm just taking the 8 top level themes here, clicking OK. And we have a few other things we can change, but I'm not going to change them just yet. I just want to show you how this looks when it's run with this new format. So I run this now, and a couple of things have changed. First thing, it has scaled the coverage, scaled the y-axis so that the top one, real estate development, is now quite high up on the visualization at just under 40% of the total coverage. We can then see things like natural environment, economy, infrastructure, policy management, so on and so forth. Yes, Ilundi.
Sorry, I don't know if you mentioned this, but I was just wondering, how do you assign specific colors to specific codes?
Yeah, I'll show you how to do that. I was wondering if someone was going to ask. So to assign a color to a code, you want to navigate to your codes area and right click on the code that you want to color. And there's a color option down here, and you can assign a color to that code from this selection here. And then once you've done that, if you want it to show up when you've got the chart open where it says color scheme in the top left, you click that and you select item colors, and it'll do that for you. Any other questions so far?
Yeah, sorry, I do as well.
Yeah, no worries. Don't have to apologize. I get paid for it.
So you possibly already explained this, but when it says percentage coverage, what does that actually mean? So
Yeah.
I'm looking at my own data and it doesn't have anything near 40%. I've got like the highest one is just over 7%.
Yep, that's probably about right. Percentage coverage is it adds up the sum total of characters in the entire file. So this file might have 50 to 60,000 characters in it, and it is what percentage of those characters has been coded to this code. And so in Barbara's interview, it's 40%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 40% of that file, of all of the characters in that file, have been coded to real estate development.
And this is off the interview, not the case. So this is off
Yes.
everything I've said as well in those. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So this includes also the interviewer as well. And if we were to change, and we can do that. So if we could select data, we can actually change the thing that we want to look at. However, NVivo's a bit of a pain about this. It doesn't let us select the case. And what we would have to do if we wanted to visualize the amount of coding that's done in a case is we would need to go to our cases, select Barbara, and create a new visualization for coding that's been done to that case.
Yeah.
I don't really know why. It's just something that NVivo does, is that it treats cases and files quite separately, so separately that you can't kind of like move between one or the other in a visualization. But that's how you would do it for the case if you were interested.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. So have a quick look at this one, where it says that real estate development has constituted 40% of the interview, whereas natural environment, 33%. Just keep a look at this one, because when I select my data again, I can change my y-axis to not be percentage coverage. We might not find that meaningful. I could instead change that to the total number of coding references. So that is the total number of discrete times that I have identified these codes. And so I can select number of coding references. And if I do it again, suddenly the economy is now well ahead with 29 references, whereas real estate development is now a little bit lower at 6 references. And this is a little sort of like learning point when it comes to this stuff, because you might be thinking, all right, Alex, that's not a huge deal. But NVivo will fluctuate between the types of data that it presents. And so when you create a matrix code, which is what we did yesterday, that by default shows you the total number of coding references. It doesn't show you a percentage or anything like that. And so it's really important, if you are going to be reporting on any of these numbers, that you're like quite consistent about which numbers you are going to be reporting and why. You might have them side by side potentially. One of the great things about NVivo's visualization function, similar to the queries, if you double click on any of the kind of items, right? So we've got this, if we click on this bar here, it will open up a copy of the code, and it will highlight in yellow what that what is being represented in the visualization. So it's not as powerful as the queries function, which gave us a, like a much more kind of clear cut answer, but it will show you what the data is, which can be a really nice way of going about and writing up your results. And we can make lots of other changes to this if you want. You can click on edit labels, so you can edit the text of the labels depending on what you would, what would be more appropriate. You can kind of change the color scheme a little bit, and using this drop-down menu up here, you can, if you really want to, you can make it 3D. If you think 3D graphs are really interesting, this can work quite well for like multiple different cases or files that you're looking at, but we can leave it like that. A couple of other things you can do: you can tick on for some data values, and you can choose to add different grid lines if you're someone who's really into grid lines. You can add those in as well. It's not super flexible, right, compared to most other visualization software. And so you might be looking at this and thinking, okay, this is fine. But if you right click, you can export the chart. It's basically just going to look exactly how it looks now. And you can export it as, PNG, JPEG, all of these different file types. But importantly, none of the file types that you export it as are things that you can then go on and customize in more detail. And this, I think, is one of NVivo's kind of big problems when it comes to visualizations. There are a few tools out there now. I taught Catma recently, and Catma's visualizations are really cool because you can create them in Catma, and then it actually gives you access to an editor where you can change lots of different things about your visualizations. It's really flexible. It's really, really cool. And NVivo doesn't have that. And so one of the key recommendations that I make is, if you don't particularly like how a visualization in NVivo looks, which, to be honest, I often find myself in that position, you can click on summary, and this gives you a summary of your data in a table form. you can right click, you can export that list to Excel or as a as a text file or whatever you like. You can export the raw data and then visualize it in something more preferable, even if that is just Excel, or even if it is maybe not even, but if you're using something like Tableau or something like that, or Vega, you can then sort of upload this data and edit it and visualize it with much more granularity than you can currently do in NVivo. And that's just an extra bit of workflow there. So just to kind of cover the steps so that it's, because I'm about to ask you to do some of this, right? What we did was we found something that we wanted to visualize. We right click, we select visualize, and we're charting document coding. You can experiment with some of the other options here if you like. We're going to chart document coding. And then once we have that visualization that's been created for us, we're going to right click and we're going to select our data so that we can be a little bit more fine-tuned with what exactly it is that we are visualizing here. You can then export that chart as an image file, or you can export the raw data as an Excel file by exporting the list, and you can make some rudimentary adjustments to it in the specific contextual little tab that we get at the top here. Any questions about this that I've shown off so far today?
I do, Alex, Emily. And I'm working on a Mac, so it does look a bit different, but that's fine. I figured out pretty much everything that you've just talked about.
Yep.
But what I can't find is, where did you get to just the list?
Oh, yeah. So on the Windows version, it's on this right-hand side here. I have a feeling on the Mac that it might be closer to the top over here, potentially, but I'm not too sure. It should be somewhere. What I might do is I might give it a quick Google while everyone is kind of like playing around with this. I'll give it a Google and I'll get back to you and
Yep.
see if I have an answer. But yes,
Yep.
for the rest of you, what I would like you to do is to create a bar chart which visualizes some of the thematic coding, not for the file. I'd like you to try it for a case that's in the sample project, just so it's a little bit different to what I showed off before. And then while that's going on, I will have a little Google.
Alex, while you're doing that, so I've just gone into a case, and the option to do it like that chart is grayed
Yeah,
out.
it's
And I
grayed
have,
out.
and I have to do it as explore diagram.
Could you, what I might do, I imagine you might be working with sensitive data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the recording and I'm going to ask if you're comfortable sharing your screen, and I'll see if I can workshop some of the problems that you might be running into,
Yep.
because I feel like that's going to be a little bit easier. So let me just pause the.
I don't know if I'm missing something, how to code it to a specific case rather than a file.
Oh, yes. So to visualize a specific case, I'll go over here and I've started the recording again.
Just because I'm like, this does not look right. The crap that I've ended up with.
You should be able to go to cases. We'll find the case that we want to visualize. We want to visualize case coding. And by default, it just gives us Barbara. I think we need to select some data and change to selected items. And then we should be able to hopefully select those codes. And hopefully it works. Otherwise, I might just be replicating stuff that you've already done and it might not work. But then if I run it again, you can see that I've now got the selected codes with the percentage coverage updated. So
okay, that's what I hadn't done. It was a selected item bit.
Yeah, a few extra steps. Cool. Alrighty. So what I want to do now for essentially is like the rest of the class today is kind of go through a few other visualization options, giving you kind of sense for what they do, because it could be a little bit unclear based on their names. So the first one we're going to look at now is the hierarchy chart. So hierarchy chart's kind of fun. I quite like them. We're going to go to explore, and I'm pretty sure even on the Mac version, if you go to explore and select hierarchy chart, you should get this hierarchy charts ... option, hopefully. If not, that's okay. But we're going to select that, and it's going to open up a wizard for us that's going to guide us through creating a hierarchy chart. And it gives you a really nice little representation of what that chart is going to look like. And essentially, it's like a nested visualization where you've got like large sort of squares and areas, and in them you've got like their children and stuff like that. So it can be a really nice way of showing off the proportion of coding that you've done within your hierarchies. So if I select amount of coding for codes and I select next, and I don't want to look at all of my codes because I know that I've got a lot of like automated ones that have been generated. So I'm going to click selected codes. I want to make sure I have automatically select descendant codes ticked, otherwise it's going to take me ages. And I am just going to click all of these ones. I'm not going to click attitude. I might as well. Yeah, I'll click attitude because it's kind of a fun one to look at, but I'm not going to click memorable quotes. Going to click OK. And we want to look in all of our areas because that's going to give us slightly more interesting results to look at. And I'm going to click finish, and it is going to generate for us a lovely little hierarchy chart. So as expected, given that the attitude code is qualitatively quite different to the theme codes, it makes sense that it would be the most coded because most of the text can apply to these codes here. So it's going to take up quite a large proportion. But you can see here for our codes like natural environment, if you hover over them, it'll tell you the exact number of references. And the exact number of references is kind of what's shaping the hierarchy chart. It's and again we can choose to have item color on, except kind of frustrating if you choose item color in this one, it actually just sort of tags the top left corner with it rather than the actual color of the chart itself, which is a minor pet peeve that some people might have. And if you click on any of the little areas, so if we click on natural environment, it will zoom in. If I right click on natural environment, I can view the references there. So I can go and see what I have. And it'll open up a reference. What it's doing here is it's actually just running a coding query and then just giving you the results. And you can go using this little home thing, you can zoom back out, you can keep zooming in. And it doesn't just work for your coding. You know, this is kind of nice, but it also works for other things as well. So if I go back to explore hierarchy charts, one of the other things you can do is you can do it for your cases. And so go attribute values assigned to cases. You can click next. We can select one of our classifications. So I'm going to select person. And what we can have is we can have our age groups and then genders, and we are creating the hierarchy ourselves here. So we can, move things around and experiment. I'm just going to use these two for now just to show it off. And if I click finish here, we're then going to end up with nice little boxes that will tell us how many of our participants were within this age group. So we've got 35 people between the ages of 50 to 59. We've got 21 between the ages of 40 to 49. And it can be a nice kind of way of looking at how your data is structured. Now, of course, NVivo is not a data science tool. There are other much clearer ways and cleaner ways of doing this in much more data sciencey tools, your Pythons, your R's, stuff like that. But if you don't want to take the time in it to learn those tools because they're quite cumbersome, then this can just be a nice way of getting a bit of a snapshot of how some of the attributes in your data look, which can be quite useful. If you are interested, if you take your data out of a survey software like Qualtrics or RedCap or something, and you just want to have a quick reminder of what it looks like without needing to go into those, then you can use something like this. And again, if you right click, you can actually right click and select view cases, and then it will give you a list here of all of the people that meet that criteria. So all of the people that are between ages 50 to 59 and male, it'll give us all of the results there. If you need to export these results, you can. And the way that this is working is I'm pretty sure it's just applying a couple of filters to your classification sheet. So you can do this in your classification sheet if you need to as well. So that's the hierarchy chart. Does anyone have any questions about that? Anyone interested in certain things that it can do? You can make it into a starburst chart if you really wanted to. That's fun. It's exciting. But does anyone have any questions? No. All right. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to play around with this one as well. So I'd just like you to take a little bit of time to replicate a couple of the things that I've done here. Ideally, I really like the one where you highlight, you do a hierarchy chart for all of the case classification attributes, but just have a little play around with it. Try kind of moving through it and then moving back. I actually quite like it as a, sometimes as a writing aid. I've used it before because I kind of like the, zooming in and zooming out kind of stuff. I find that kind of dynamic and kind of fun way to go about writing sometimes. So have a little play around with it. And if you run into any issues or if there's anything that you need me to show off again, please do let me know.
Alex, sorry, it's Emily again. I can completely do all the beginning bit of that, but I can't do it for the attribute. I don't know how to do that. I mean, there's a selection on visualize, so it automatically comes up with coding for codes.
Yeah.
Comes up with that for all the codes straight away. But then it has coding for files, attribute values for cases, and attribute values for files. So I should only.
So it should be attribute file values for cases should be what you're selecting, if that's there.
Oh yeah, okay. And then it sort of changes the menu, and I'm just wondering how I.
Yeah, then you should
Oh,
have.
so then I've got to select the ones that I want to do.
Yep.
I don't really understand what it's showing me though.
Yeah, it's good to sort of just experiment for a little bit. And so select the classification that you're interested, like just select one, like person or whatever you have in your project, which I understand to be a little bit different because you're using your own data. And then you select the attributes that you want to see kind of the proportions compared. So age and gender are usually two quite useful ones here. So you can select those two and then see how that looks.
Yeah, so I can do that, but can you do it against the like codes as well?
No,
So,
no, I don't think you. Yeah, no, I don't think so. It would be a really nice feature, and hypothetically, NVivo would have the capacity to do that, but it doesn't seem to. It only kind of lets you go one at a time with these things, which is fine. Like what you're after, where you can see the proportion of coding based on particular attribute values. I would just recommend using the cross-table query that we looked at yesterday, because that's exactly what that does.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions? No. People happy for me to move on? I'll get some engagement. People leave a thumbs up if you're happy for me to move on today. It's thumbs up from Emily. Thumbs up from Melindy. Thank you very much. All right, cool. That's quorum. It's majority. I'll move on. So we want to look now at another little visualization option. This one's the cluster diagram. I like the cluster diagram. Cluster diagrams are, they are, how I've often mentioned that NVivo is like purely qualitative. Cluster diagrams, as far as I can tell, are quite a quantitative measure. And for some projects, they can be quite useful. Not everyone's project needs to have this, and a lot of qualitative projects don't, but they can be really helpful in certain cases, and I want to show them off. So if we go to the Explore area, again, we're going to click on Diagrams, and we're going to click on Cluster Analysis. And we're going to select Cluster Analysis, ... We can say, select the types of items you would like to cluster. And so we can select our files here, and we can click Next, and we can select our files. So we could select all of our interview files, which is what we've been working with. And we get to choose how we want to cluster them. So we can cluster them based on the similarity of coding that has been done in those files, the similarity of their attribute values. If we needed to cluster case studies together to build up profiles in ethnographic work, this can be kind of a nice guide for that. I'm going to do coding similarity. And you get to pick from three coefficients. And I've been critical of NVivo in this training course sometimes because, particularly with some of the natural language features that it has, where it does things like automated coding or automated sentiment analysis, it's got those options, but it doesn't really tell you how it does them. These coefficients are all out there in documentation. And so if you need to cite them, you can. And if you need to go and look at them in a bit more detail to understand them, you can as well. It's quite useful. So we're just going to select Jacquard's coefficient today. I'm going to click finish. And what NVivo is going to generate for us is a little diagram like this. And all this is saying is that the coding that has been done between Betty and Paul and Helen is quite similar. And then the next most similar one to them would be Ken. Ken and that kind of group of three is quite dissimilar to the rest. And then we've got, Barbara and Robert, quite similar, and so on and so forth. So it's an assessment of the similarity in coding between them there. And you can get this data as a summary table. And so you can filter by Jacquard's coefficient. So if we filter like this is going to give us the highest coefficient at the top. And that's going to tell us which are the most similar in terms of coding, which is between Robert and Barbara, right? File A, file B have a coefficient of 0.51. Fantastic. So we can say that they're quite similar files in terms of the coding that's been done. Likewise for Thomas and Susan, between them as well, they are also quite similar. And so it's just a nice little way of representing your data. And it's a nice way of getting some of these metrics if you wanted to use them. If you wanted to confirm that a particular set of cases were quite similar to each other, this can be a nice, straightforward way of doing that. The diagram, I think you can take it or leave it. You can change the diagram a lot if you want to have, loads of clusters. You can actually lower the amount of clusters that you have as well. The way that it's clustering them is actually based on the color scheme, but the color scheme is actually quite difficult to look at. So what I would recommend is if you tag on cluster ID here, it will provide a number for the clusters. So if we only have 2, you can see that Helen and Betty and Paul and Ken, that's like the cluster 2, and then we've got all of these in cluster 1. And as we add complexity, you can see that it sort of continues to go more and more granular with your data as you go, which is interesting stuff to look at. You can change how this visualization looks. Again, you can do a similar thing by exporting the data, but if you wanted to have a 2D cluster map, which I find quite a fun one to look at, the 2D cluster map is just spacing them out based on how similar they are, but it's practically unintelligible. You can make it 3D, which is like a little bit like slightly easier to pass, but not really. Like you would look at this and it would be very hard for you to recognize that Barbara and Thomas are really similar, right? This is something that you'd more likely to use for like quite substantial amounts of data. And you can make it also a circle. I find all of these visualization options broadly quite difficult to pass, but you do have this nice little dendrogram here that you can use, which I find quite helpful. I'm not going to ask you to go and do this on your own because I think that it's such a niche use case, but it's just something that NVivo can do that a lot of people aren't really aware of that can be quite useful for confirming certain suspicions you might have about your data or disconfirming them, and give you a little bit of extra kind of insights into how you've gone about your coding and all of these sorts of things. Does anyone have any questions about the cluster analysis, the cluster diagram? No. Anyone enthusiastic about it? Anyone loving the look of this? This will show up on the recording, but I just want everyone to know. No one's that enthusiastic about it. That's okay. If you're watching the recording and you love it, like send me an email and we can talk about it in more detail. So another thing, the final visualization that I want to share with you today is the comparison diagram, which can be quite useful. Again, is a bit more niche. And so we're going to click on diagrams and we are going to, let's say we want to compare 2 different files. And so this is something that I've done in my thesis. I do things like this. And we can select 2 interviews. We can select Barbara and if we go based on our cluster diagram, actually, so we know that Barbara is really dissimilar to Helen or to Ken. So what I might do is I might go to diagrams compare files, and I might select Barbara's file, and then I might select Ken's file. Now it's quite interesting. We can actually get a pretty good read on why it is that Barbara is so different and why these three different data types are so different based on coding, right? Ken is a video, Helen is an audio file, and Betty and Paul is a video file. And that's likely to be the reason why there are quite a few differences in the comparison. So what I might instead do is I might take one of these other textual ones here. I might take Margaret as the one that we're comparing. And you can only you can select multiple files that you want to compare, I think, but we're just going to select Barbara and we're just going to select Margaret. And what that is going to generate for us is something that looks just crazy to begin with, which is it's generating essentially a little project map for us that just has on the right-hand side here, this is everything that is only coded to Margaret. The left-hand side here, this is everything that is coded to Barbara and including a few extra things. And then in the middle here, this is everything that is coded to both of them. And it's a bit overwhelming, but we can actually remove a few things from this and add a few things that are a bit more interesting. So the first thing is I don't care about the cases that they're coded to. That's not relevant. I can get rid of that. I'm also not that interested in memo links, and I'm also not that interested in relationships. So I can remove those from the visualization there as well. And so that cleans things up a little bit. And I can also just remove all of the codes and get rid of everything if I want, which I am actually going to do just so I can add in a few extra things to show you how some of these other features in the diagram work. So if I click on attribute values, that is actually going to show off some of the attribute values that is associated with the interview file. And so for this one, it's worth keeping in mind that I've selected two files here. I haven't selected two cases. And so the classification stuff, we can see that they've both had different interviewers. One had Nancy, one had Henry. Margaret's one was conducted at 10:30 a.m., whereas Barbara's was at 12 p.m. We can visualize that stuff if we want to. We can visualize the classification that they belong to. So both of them belong to the interview. We can visualize any potential see also links that people have used. And so both Barbara and Margaret have been linked to the WWS Research Journal, which might be interesting, because Margaret just really has this Marshallberg Harbor, which she probably mentions. And both of them are mentioned in this area about local identity and knowledge. And then we can see if they're linked to any memos, which it doesn't look like they are. And then finally, we can also look at static set as well, which is something I don't really look at in this course. So there's loads of different things that you can look at here with the explore diagram. Now, it looks really overwhelming in the sample project because it uses lots of different things. Like it is using, one of the sort of annoying things about the diagram is it kind of shows you everything that is coded there. You're likely to find in your own projects that you're not going to have data that is as overwhelming as this when you run one of these comparison diagrams. You're not going to have a project that is as over the top with how comprehensive it is as NVivo's sample project. So you'll be okay. I do quite like the diagram like this one. Any questions about this?
Yes, Alex, I would have one I was just wondering, sorry, so the best way, this is probably like a quantitative mind research question. Like if I want to kind of not demonstrate, but like kind of look at pattern based on participant characteristics, let's say age or I don't know, let's say age or level of education. Is it the best way to kind of give attribute to my participants and then do this basically?
Yeah, so this is there's something we covered yesterday. I'll show you how it works.
Okay.
Definitely need to give classifications to cases for this to work, but I'll show you what it is. And if we go to explore, it's the cross tab. So it's in the queries drop down. It's the cross tab query. What we can do is on the left-hand side here, we can pull in certain codes that we're interested in. So we might have natural environment and economy, for example. And then we can choose what classification we want to compare that to. So we might say, all right, we're going to look at our people and we want it sort of separated by age group. And then again, once we've separated it by age group, we can separate that by gender. And we'll run that query. And what that will give us is this will give us a table with the breakdown of all of the comments made about the natural environment between 30 to 39-year-olds who are female. And if you double click on this cell, it will bring up those references. So you can then start to look through and see, okay, like what are the patterns here? How is it that, younger people talk about this? And then what you might do is you might go back to your crosstab and you might look at, older people, double click on that, have that data open as well. This is something you can also kind of do, because one of the things I showed off in part 3 was the framework matrix, which gives you those quotes immediately. This one doesn't. You have to double click to access the quotes. This is something you can replicate on a framework matrix a little bit. So if you right click and we create a new one, and I'm just going to give it a sort of random name here, you can select some cases. So we might select all of our interview participants, and you can actually sort the rows of your framework matrix by particular attributes. So we might separate ours based on gender, for example, and we might then make our code column, we'll select some theme codes. We might take all of these, take all of those ones, and run that. And what that's going to give us is it is going to give us the framework matrix. It's going to take a little bit of time for it to load. And when it gives you this one, it is also then going to give you the relevant classification value there as well. And if I auto summarize it, it will then give me all of the textual information. You can then export this to Excel and show that to people if you need to. So that's the other option in terms of, the patterns that you recognize. You can do it like that. The other way that you can do it is you can then, visualize certain things. And there are a few visualizations that do work based on attribute values. I think the bar chart has an option there as well. I think the interesting thing to keep in mind is you're about to get Edna's tail go over the camera again. She's decided to be very adventurous in the last few minutes of the training. Oh, hello. And she's jumped off. One of the things to keep in mind here is that it's often the case that you might actually have coded 2 comments to the same code, but those comments actually express quite different personal narratives, as is the case in this project. Like with this project, there are people who are talking about balance, but they might be talking about balance in very different ways. And so having something like the framework matrix can give you a way of then starting to potentially identify different codes or subcodes that help express the differences in presentation of what you had previously identified as sort of a single code. Can be very, very useful for helping to provide a bit more information there. Does that address the question, I hope? Yep. Wonderful. All right. So we've got 8 minutes left today. One of the things that I wasn't able to show off earlier in the course, which I might just show off very quickly, are the other 2 maps that you can work with. So I showed off the concept map, which allows you to pull in different items from your project. I'm going to show off the project map now, which is something that you don't have access to on the Mac version. Apologies. So I'm going to show it very quickly. And what the project map allows you to do is it's basically the comparison diagram, but you get a little bit more customization with what you put in. So I can drag in, Barbara's, what I might actually do is I might drag in Barbara's case. I can drag in Barbara's case. I can drag in Betty's case, and there's no relationship between the two. But then I can also drag in for my case classifications. I could drag in things like, I think, township, and not all of these are going to have some information coded to them, but you can drag in lots of things like this, and they won't create links automatically. But one of the things that will is if you drag in something like a code, it'll start to create automatic links between them. So you can drag in codes, and it will start to show you what has and has not been coded. Now, you might be thinking, why would you do this, Alex? This seems a little bit cumbersome. I actually have a really practical use case for this, which is that when you're doing qualitative research, especially early on in a project, you are going to be doing and reaching a point of theoretical saturation at some point. And theoretical saturation or data saturation or coding saturation or however people call it is when you run out of codes. Like, you've done enough. You've identified the sort of salient narratives and themes that address your research questions, and you're not generating any more codes. That process, inductively, could take a bit of time. And sometimes, this has happened to me, I'm generating new codes in a second file. Like, I've gone through my first interview, I've coded that, and I'm onto my second interview, and I'm identifying new codes, or I'm onto my third file. And I really like this project map because it can sometimes, and has in the past, shown me stuff that I've missed. And it might be the case that, for this one here, okay, I've coded Barbara first. It's the first one I've coded. I actually didn't come up with this sense of community down east code until my second file. And I can now see, when I've created this project map, that I have missed that. And then I go back into Barbara's file, I reread it, and I see if there are any opportunities for me to then code that data to this new one. So I really like the project map for that. The other one that we can create, and I'll show this off very, very briefly, is a nice little mind map. And the mind map is also very straightforward. You have this central concept, mind map, and then all you do is you just drag in, you say, okay, I want to give this a child idea. And you can say my child idea is going to be the environment or something like that. You can use a mind map in NVivo to create a coding framework. Really, really useful if you're collaborating. This is really good at the point in a project, if you're working on a collaborative project, or even if you're working on it by yourself. Thematic maps in reflexive thematic analysis and in lots of other qualitative methods, maps that explain how your project and how the themes that you've identified kind of fit together. The mind map is a good-ish place to start sort of fleshing that out. I say ish just because that in a lot of thematic maps that you might see for methods of qualitative analysis, there's not like this hierarchical relationship between all of the themes. Often your three key themes will kind of intersect with each other at interesting points. Some of your sub-themes might intersect with each other at interesting points, but using this mind map can be a somewhat useful way of managing some of your themes when it comes to the stage that you need to then start to synthesize them and combine them together and see what fits and what doesn't. So that's the little mind map. You can create little structures there. You always have to have one central idea. So if I was to create a sibling idea, you can see that it's actually not a sibling idea, which is a bit misleading. This idea is your kind of central idea, and everything kind of like branches off of that in interesting ways. Cool. All right. That is the other stuff that I wanted to show off in kind of a blitz round. I know it's been a little bit overwhelming. I just wanted to make sure that I covered everything that I could cover today, and so that's going to be added into the recording. We're at the end of our 5-part introductory series. We've got files into NVivo. We've coded them. We've created cases and classifications, and we've taken notes, and we've looked at queries and framework matrices and charts and a whole range of stuff that we've looked at over the last 5 hours that we've spent together. There are going to be some advanced sessions running where I'm going to look at collaborating and literature reviews and structured data sets and things like that. And there will likely be a repeat of the introductory session that I will run in person later on in the semester as well. And hopefully some informal catch-ups, because teaching NVivo from home on a computer is a pretty isolating experience. And I know from him, the way that I've taught this over the years, that personal connections in person are very, very beneficial when you can do them. So hopefully we'll be able to take some opportunities there. As always, before you leave, I would absolutely love it, even if you're watching the recording, to fill in this feedback form and to just pop that in and let me know what you thought about the whole course. If there were areas that you thought could be improved, be as constructive as you like. Don't be mean. I would appreciate that. And that is it for the course. Like, thank you very much for attending. I know it's been a pretty condensed version of the training. I normally run this over the course of 5 weeks. I've run it over 2 weeks this time, so I can understand if there's a bit of information overload. if you have any clarifying questions, or if you start using NVivo and things aren't sticking, and you want to ask me a question, you can reach out to me at my email address there and let me know, and I can, meet up with you. You can meet up over Zoom, you can meet up on campus, or I might just be able to address the issue that you're having over email. Wonderful. Right. Well, I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. If you have any questions, I'm going to end the recording now so that you can ask them, and I will be seeing you around. Thanks, everyone.